The sound came first. A grinding, splintering shriek of timber against coral, a sound that seemed to rise from beneath the ship itself, as though the ocean had reached up with teeth. It was just before dawn on the 4th of June, 1629, and the Batavia pride of the Dutch East India Company, had just struck Morning Reef in the Houtman Abrolhos, a scattered archipelago of low coral islands off the western coast of Australia. Most aboard were still asleep. Within moments, they were not. The ship did not sink. That would have been a mercy. Instead, the Batavia wedged itself onto the reef, its hull cracked, but not yet destroyed, its masts still standing against a sky just beginning to lighten. Waves pounded the wounded vessel, each surge driving it harder against the coral, each retreat dragging more of its belly open to the sea. The passengers and crew, over 300 men, women, and children, woke to chaos, to screaming, to the impossible realization that the known world had just ended. They were 7,000 miles from home. No European had ever set foot on this coastline. No rescue ship would know where to search. And the nearest landmass visible from the tilting deck was not land at all, just a handful of low, treeless islands, barely rising above the waterline, surrounded by the same reef that had just condemned them. In the gray half-light, small boats were lowered. People climbed down rope ladders, fell into the churning water, clung to debris. The sea was warm, but the current was vicious. Some drowned within sight of the wreck. Others made it to the nearest islands, Beacon Island, Schrader's Island, the unnamed scraps of coral and sand that would become their prison. By the time the sun fully rose, the survivors were scattered across multiple islands. They had salvaged some food, some water casks, some sailcloth for shelter. They had also brought with them the full hierarchy of the ship: the commander, the merchants, the soldiers, the sailors, the women, the children. They believed, in those first hours, that order would hold, that someone would take charge, that help would come. They were wrong on all counts. The Houtman Abrolhos is not a place meant for human habitation. The islands are flat, so flat that a man standing at their center can see the horizon in every direction. There are no trees, no streams, no shade. The vegetation, where it exists, is low scrub, saltbush, and spinifex, plants that offer nothing edible and little protection from the sun. The surrounding waters teem with fish and sea lions, but without proper equipment, catching them is difficult. And above all, there is no fresh water. None. The rain, when it falls, vanishes into the coral sand within minutes. The survivors of the Batavia found themselves marooned in a place that offered almost everything necessary for death and almost nothing necessary for life. In those first days, the focus was on salvage. Boats returned to the wreck again and again, pulling barrels of bread, casks of wine, chests of goods from the flooded holds. The Batavia had been carrying not only passengers, but also a vast cargo intended for the company's trading posts in the East Indies: silver coins, jewels, fine cloth, and 12 chests containing a fortune in gold and silver intended to finance an entire year of trade. This wealth meant nothing now, but old habits die slowly. The chests were salvaged. The coins were counted. The ledgers were kept. Meanwhile, the water ran out. The commander of the voyage, Francisco Pelsaert, made a decision. He would take the ship's longboat, along with a small crew, including the senior skipper, Arian Jacobs, and sail north to search for water on the mainland, or failing that, continue all the way to Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, the company's headquarters in the Indies, to fetch rescue ships. It was a desperate plan. The longboat was small, the sea was vast, and the journey to Batavia would cover nearly 2,000 miles of open ocean. But Pelsaert saw no alternative. On the 9th of June, 5 days after the wreck, the longboat departed. Pelsaert left behind roughly 250 survivors. He left behind the women and children. He left behind the wounded. And he left behind a man named Hieronymus Cornelis. This was the first catastrophic error. Hieronymus Cornelis was not a sailor. He was an apothecary by training, a merchant by profession, and a man whose mind had drifted into dangerous waters long before the Batavia struck its reef. Born in Friesland around 1598, Cornelis had once been a respectable citizen, married, established, unremarkable. But by the time he boarded the Batavia in Amsterdam, his life had unraveled. His business had failed. His infant son had died. His wife had left him. More troubling still, he had fallen under the influence of a heretical painter named Johannes Terentius, whose libertine philosophy rejected conventional morality entirely. Terentius taught that sin did not exist, that the elect were beyond good and evil, that ordinary rules did not apply to those who had achieved spiritual enlightenment. These ideas took root in Cornelis's mind and grew into something monstrous. Before the shipwreck, Cornelis had already been plotting mutiny with skipper Jacobs. The plan had been to seize the Batavia murder its officers, steal its treasure, and sail away to begin new lives as pirates. The wreck had interrupted this scheme, but it had not killed it. Instead, it had given Cornelis something even more valuable: an isolated population, cut off from all authority, desperate for leadership, and utterly dependent on whoever controlled the remaining supplies. Within days of Pelsert's departure, Cornelis maneuvered himself into power. He was charming. He was articulate. He wore fine clothes salvaged from the wreck, and spoke with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. The other survivors, frightened and disorganized, looked to him for direction. He provided it first through reassurance, then through control of the food and water stores, and finally through the careful cultivation of an inner circle of loyal followers. The violence did not begin immediately. It crept in slowly, like tide water through sand. The first killings were disguised as necessity. Cornelis argued that the islands could not support all the survivors. The supplies were finite. The rescue was uncertain. Hard choices had to be made. He proposed that groups be sent to other islands to search for water and food, and so, in the weeks following the wreck, parties of men were dispatched to distant islands with minimal provisions and vague instructions. They were not expected to return. Some groups were sent to islands too far to reach the main camp without boats. Others were sent to the mainland itself, a journey of 50 miles across open water, with instructions to signal if they found fresh water. They found none. They lit fires anyway. No response came. They were abandoned. Meanwhile, on Beacon Island, the inner circle tightened. Cornelis selected his lieutenants carefully. They were young, mostly men in their 20s, soldiers and sailors who had chafed under shipboard discipline and now found themselves offered something intoxicating: power without accountability. Among them were Leonard Michiels van Oos, David Zevenk, Konrad van Huysen, and others whose names would later appear in the execution records. Cornelis bound them to him through complicity. Each was made to participate in violence. Each was stained. Each knew that survival now depended on the conspiracy's success. The killings became less disguised. A carpenter named Hendrik Denis was drowned for suspicion of disloyalty. A family of 6 was murdered in a single night, the parents, the children, all of them. Women were claimed as possessions, assigned to Cornelis's favorites, forced into what the later trial records would describe with clinical horror. A group of sick men was marched to the beach under the pretense of being moved to better shelter. They were stabbed and left for the tide. The murders followed a pattern. They came at night or at dawn when the victims were isolated. They were committed quickly with swords and knives, and the bodies were disposed of in the sea or buried in shallow graves. The survivors who witnessed these killings were themselves terrorized into silence. To speak was to be next. By the end of July, over 100 people had been killed. But not everyone was under Cornelis's control. When the dispersal began, a group of soldiers had been sent to a larger island, now called Weeb Hayes Island, after their leader, a man whose name would become synonymous with resistance. Weeb Hayes was a common soldier, low-ranking, unremarkable, the kind of man whose name rarely survives in historical records. But he was also competent, calm, and suspicious. Hayes and his men had been sent to search for water, and against all expectation, they found it. Small wells dug into the coral sand yielded brackish but drinkable water. The island had more vegetation, more wildlife. It could sustain them. Hayes sent signals back to Beacon Island, expecting boats to bring the other survivors over. No boats came. Instead, Cornelis sent raiding parties. Armed men crossed the shallow waters between the islands with orders to kill Hayes and his soldiers to eliminate the one group that might resist the coming plan. Because Cornelis had a plan now, when the rescue ship arrived, he intended to seize it. He would kill the rescue crew, load the treasure, and sail away with his chosen few to begin their new lives. But Hayes and his men fought back. Using driftwood and salvaged materials, they fashioned crude weapons, morning stars, pikes, clubs studded with nails. They posted sentries. They built stone fortifications. When Cornelis's men attacked, the soldiers met them at the waterline and drove them back. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand, desperate. Men died on both sides, but Hayes's group held. The siege continued for weeks. On the 17th of September, 1629, Francisco Pelsaert returned. His journey had been an odyssey. The longboat had reached Batavia after a voyage of 33 days, during which the crew survived on rainwater and raw fish. Pelsaert had immediately secured a rescue ship, the **Sardam**, and sailed back to the Abrolhos as quickly as he could. He expected to find survivors struggling against the elements. He found a war. As the **Sardam** approached the islands, two boats raced toward it from different directions. One carried Cornelis and his men. The other carried Weeb Hayes. Hayes reached the ship first. He clambered aboard and gasped out a warning. "Do not let the others on board. They are murderers. They have killed over 100 people." Cornelis, arriving moments later, was seized before he could speak. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Pelsaert interrogated the survivors, collecting testimony that would fill hundreds of pages. The accounts were consistent, detailed, and horrifying. Cornelis and his followers had committed murder, rape, and torture on a scale that defied comprehension. The trials were conducted on the islands themselves, under the harsh sun that had witnessed the crimes. Jeronimus Cornelis was tortured. His hands were cut off, and then hanged on Seal Island on the 2nd of October, 1629. 7 of his lieutenants were executed alongside him. 2 others, Wouter Loos and Jan Pelgrim de Bay, were judged too young to die. Instead, they were marooned on the Australian mainland, the first Europeans known to have lived on that continent. They were never seen again. The story of the Batavia did not end with the executions. Pelsaert returned to Batavia with the survivors and the treasure, most of it recovered from the wreck. He filed his report. He presented his testimony. And then, within a year, he was dead, likely from disease exacerbated by the strain of his ordeal. The Dutch East India Company, embarrassed by the scandal, suppressed the full account for decades. But the records survived. They survived still: the journals, the trial transcripts, the letters, preserved in archives in The Hague and Jakarta. They offer no comfort. They describe, in clinical 17th century prose, the systematic murder of men, women, and children. They record the names of the dead. They note the weapons used, the locations of the killings, the excuses offered by the perpetrators. They document what happens when the structures of civilization collapse entirely, and nothing remains to restrain the darkest impulses of the human mind. The bones of the victims remain in the Abrolhos. Archaeologists have found them, buried in shallow graves or scattered across the coral, still bearing the marks of violent skulls fractured by blunt force, bones scored by blades. The wreck of the Batavia itself was located in 1963 and has since been partially excavated. Its reconstructed stern now stands in a museum in Fremantle, a monument to a voyage that ended in nightmare. The islands are quiet now. The sea lions bask on the rocks. The water is clear and warm. Tourists visit to dive the wreck, to photograph the coral, to feel the sun that once beat down on desperate survivors and their killers alike. The wind moves across the flat islands without obstruction, carrying nothing but salt and silence. But the questions remain. How quickly can order collapse? How easily can ordinary people become complicit in atrocity? What thin membrane separates the merchant, the soldier, the sailor from the murderer? The Batavia offers no answers, only evidence. Only the testimony of those who survived, and the silence of those who did not. Somewhere beneath the sand of Beacon Island, the dead are still waiting. No one has ever counted them all.